From Nashville, Tennessee, Music City, USA, and the home of hot chicken, it's the Rick Altizer Show. Sit back, buckle up. Rick will talk with the movers, shakers, and creators who put Christ in Christian entertainment. He's a man who's clear so the world can hear. Here's Rick Altizer.
Thank you for joining me today for the Rick Altizer Show. Today is part 2 of my interview with Ashley Cleveland, singer, songwriter, and author. And we're going to be talking about her book, Little Black Sheep, a memoir today. Now, if you missed our first show, you can go to rickaltizer.com. It's posted there. You can listen to it. I highly recommend that you do that. I'm going to give you just a little update here. Ashley has won 2 Dove Awards, 3 Grammy Awards, the first woman to be nominated for Best Rock Album and for a Grammy Award, Best Gospel Rock Album, and the only woman to have won it 3 times. We did discuss how she's had a lot of acclaim in her music, songwriting from her peers, and kind of hasn't sold millions of records, but that's okay, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is for a number of reasons. I mean, but it took me, I will say, it took me a while to say, yes, that's okay.
And we did discuss a little bit before we ended our last interview was about, we talked about her book. In her book, she talks about her past, 2 alcoholic families. She calls it an alcoholic dynasty. She talked about a father who was gay, a father who was gay and who was very perfectionist, demanding, not feeling like she measured up, and looking to the stage, performing almost as a second person, finding affirmation from that. So, again, if I'm looking to performing an audience, personalizing that as a human being where I can control how I get affirmation, what I can't control is album sales. Mm-mm. So if I'm looking to that for my affirmation, but my albums aren't selling as well as what 3 Grammy Awards you would think they would be selling, where does that leave you?
That's a difficult place. And I think after I had won either my first or second Grammy, I was dropped from my record label. And what I thought would be sort of a starting point for a new chapter became a period, and it was pretty devastating. And I got to a place where I thought, you know what, I'd rather clean my house and do the laundry than play music, because at least I'll have a clean house and clean clothes, and I can have some immediate gratification there. And so I stayed home and kind of nursed my wounds for a while. But then this really what I consider just an incredible thing happened for me, which was I remembered that music, I wrote to save my own life. I played music when there was nothing else that could have kept me on the planet. It was precious to me. It was like this gift the Lord had given me to say, you belong, you matter. And I had allowed whatever failing in the industry that I had gotten to determine my love for it, and to really steal that love. And I guess at the end of the day, I remembered, oh yeah, I like to play guitar and sing. My industry fortunes have been totally up and down since then. And sometimes, great things have happened. Sometimes it's just business as usual. Sometimes I feel completely off the radar in every way. But through all that, I still remember I love music. What a gift. I get to do this as my job. So that's, and also I have 3 children, and they're all adults now. But at the time, I never, as somebody that had a really difficult childhood. And when my parents divorced, my mother had to go to work. And it was a real gift for me to have a kind of a career with a little C, because I was home for them. I mean, I went out maybe a couple of weekends a month, so it was fun to go out, and I made good money when I went out, but it was great to be home with my kids. And once I got into recovery from addiction, you know, I started to get closer and closer to being the kind of parent that I had longed for myself and that I really wanted to be, and that I wasn't able to be when I was in my addiction. And so for me, and I see that in my children today, and it goes by, anybody that's raised kids knows, it is over before you know it. And whatever you've invested, you're done. And so it ended up being a really good thing. But if you'd asked me that on the front end, I might not have had that response.
That's so much the way the Lord works. I'm with singer, songwriter, and author Ashley Cleveland. And last week we talked about your book, Little Black Sheep, a memoir, where I kind of gushed over how much I loved it. I couldn't put it down. It's such a well-written book and just so interesting, and kept my interest from page to page. I just couldn't stop turning.
Thank you.
But you talked about your own struggles with addiction and alcoholism, and last week we talked about your father. You kind of mentioned, you said he was gay. Was that something that he? And then you also said he was a perfectionist. He was very successful. He was very concerned about how things appeared and how you appeared and how things looked. When did he verbalize to you about his homosexuality?
Shortly before his death, when he was 80.
So that was just something that was just never discussed, or
right.
Well, did he not think you knew, or did he?
I think some part of him knew that, and certainly, I mean, his community was largely gay. I mean, I knew by the time I was somewhere around 11. I knew, and back then, I mean, we're talking about the 60s. It was not something discussed particularly, but you know, I knew, and I appreciated, and my mother and I talked about it later, but she never brought it up until I asked her about it, which I always appreciated. She was not one to badmouth my father. And, you know, I just don't think that he knew how to broach any subject. And it really wasn't until there was a young man that he actually had as he was old and he was failing, and there was a young man that lived with him, and there was a very platonic relationship that this young man had been estranged from his own father and really looked upon my father as a father, and my father loved him, and he was really kind to my dad, but he was also a person with some suspect behavior, and so he opened a couple of credit card accounts in my father's name, and honestly, I think he thought he could pay them all off before my dad discovered it, because my father had macular degeneration and was almost legally blind. But he was also incredibly kind to my father. So it's funny. It's like people are rarely just one thing. We all have darkness and light, you know. But this young man got into some shady things, and the result was he was murdered brutally. I think he had picked up a girl at a bar, and I don't know what transpired, because I It was a huge incident in Knoxville, but my father died before the trial, so I never knew the outcome. But it wasn't until that event happened, which emotionally shattered my father, that he began to talk about things of depth with me. It was like a dam burst, and I remember going to see him and spend time with him after this terrible event. And my father just talked about everything, talked about being gay, talked about his whole life. And it was an amazing experience, because I realized that he had tried so hard to play the hand that he felt he had been dealt and had no idea what to do with. And certainly his parents had never equipped him on any level to address any of this.
You mentioned in the book, you say that multiple times he would say, your mother and I should have never got divorced.
Yeah. I think that was his fantasy, But when they were married, first of all, he had a secret life. But secondly, he was closed off emotionally to my mother. And so there was no grounds for there was no grounds for physical intimacy. There was no grounds for emotional intimacy. There was no honesty, really. And there was no grounds for anything that would show any promise relationally. So,
and then here you are as a little child, kind of in the middle of this, and they're in the midst of their struggles, their pains, their addictions,
right?
And so you're kind of on the outside. You refer to yourself as the little black sheep, the black sheep of the family. You began to act out.
I did.
Negative behavior, pushing people away, angry.
Well, I was, I was on a very long, very intense tear. I got into some deep trouble, and really, I think had the Lord not intervened in my life, I absolutely would have kept drinking until I drank myself to death. Mm-hmm. And but he did. And he did in a way that pulled me up. I got pregnant, and and as is so often in life, the things that we view as the worst possible disaster that could befall us become the gateway to our freedom. And I didn't really care about myself when I was at that place, but suddenly there was a little person that needed me and was innocent and needed care, and I was by myself, and I will say this, my family, in all their glorious imperfection, just like me, they stepped up. So I had a lot of family support, and I think a lot of people find themselves in that place and don't have it, and I did. So there was much, to make me think on the outside anyway that I could be a mom. I think what my problem was, there was nothing on my inside that gave me any confidence that I could be a good mom, because I still was very deep in my addiction.
I've shared this before on the show. I'd like to just kind of run this concept by you and then get you to comment on it.
Okay.
I have this theory that when we approach God, we have a piece of glass, and on that piece of glass is etched a photo of our Father, our earthly Father. And we hold that up, and we look through that glass at God with the image of our earthly Father on it, and that our life work is erasing that image, is learning how to erase that image so that we can see who God really is. I just wanted you to comment on that.
I think that's very, very true. The one thing that is not part of my experience is that I don't think that I can erase that image. I think what happened for me is that God himself obliterated that glass. And when I had my child, I was so afraid of him. I thought he was waiting on perfection and performance from me. And then when I was so low and so fearful of this baby, of how I was going to take care of it, of whether it would even be born without birth defects because I had had slips during my pregnancy. I mean, I was so terrified of so many things. And when I had her, she was lovely. And I remember I had a cesarean section, and I remember laying by myself in the recovery room after my surgery. And my mother had just come to see me and to tell me that all was well with my daughter, Rebecca, and that I could just rest, and I would see her soon. And I remember laying there, and it was like the presence of the Lord filled up that room. And it was as if he pulled back this curtain and just leaned down so that I could feel his breath and said to me, "See, I'm not who you think I am." And I thought, boy, no kidding. You are not who I think you are, and now I know I have no idea who you are. But I left that hospital knowing two things: that there was a God, that I didn't really know who he was, and that he loved me, and I couldn't figure out why. And that was a starting point. And, it was a couple more years before I really began to recover. And it's certainly, I do not hold myself up as any example of anything except that I am a redeemed human being, and that God has taken something that was bent for destruction without question and made something useful and occasionally beautiful out of.
I'm talking with singer, songwriter, and author Ashley Cleveland. And I love how you talked about how God obliterated that glass with the image of your father, that he reveals himself to us, that we think we have to figure him out, and we can't. And how did God reveal himself to you?
Well, he gave me the will to live, first of all. And, I'm such a strong-willed person. It's like, I won't do that. I'll do this, but I won't do this or that or the other thing. And I was just so half-hearted about everything. I had a tiny bit of faith, a tiny bit of hope, a tiny bit of willingness. But he would take that and increase it. And, I didn't have the will to get sober, so I would say, if you want me to get sober, you're just going to have to give me the willingness to do it, because honestly, I just don't have it. I don't care. And then one day, I walked into a 12-step meeting and I've never looked back. But that was, I got sober. I stayed sober for 7 years. I relapsed off and on for 6 years. And today I've been sober for 19 years. And so, but it started with this little mustard. He does these, it's like he puts his power and his fury and his beauty and his holiness in mustard seeds, and then he deposits them in us, and they explode, and we can't not move towards the light. You know, I mean, I move out of the light just as quickly, but there's just something, he compels me. And I'm, you know, I thought I was kind of past compelling, but apparently...
No.
When he wants something, it's like Eugene Peterson says, we always think we can tame God, but he will not be tamed. But we're the recipients of the whirlwind in the best possible way. So,
for someone listening who has someone that they love that is struggling with addiction, you being that, you've been on that other side.
yes.
Or you've been that person. Can you give that person advice right now? What can they do? How can they help their loved one who is struggling?
Well, I hesitate to give advice. I will say this. Because my oldest child is an addict too, and very active, and so I know it as the child of alcoholics, as the mother of a heroin addict, and as an alcoholic and drug addict myself. As it feels so personal. It feels, and you are the recipient of a lot of anger, and it can be very abusive. But I will say, it is not you that the person is lashing out. It is them. The person that you are dealing with, they hate themselves. And it is an illness. And I think for anyone that has anyone they love, anybody that is an addict, there is incredible help out there. You know, there are age-old programs that offer ongoing meetings and help. And addiction is a family disease. One person is not the only person that's sick. Everybody gets sick. The people trying to manage the person with the disease get sick. We all participate in the illness. So the best thing that I can do today for myself, and I do it, I work on my own issues. I get help. I work at it. And it has given me more freedom than I can even believe. And not everything is resolved. As I say, you know, my mother is now sober, and we enjoy this just sweet relationship that I never dreamed is possible. My daughter, I don't know if she will ever survive this. But I have hope, and today I can live in peace, and I can focus on the one thing I can do anything about, which is me, by the grace of God.
Mm-hmm. I'm just feeling led to ask you to pray for mothers right now who have a child that's struggling. Would you feel comfortable doing that?
Yes, I would. And Lord, I have learned in the last few years that I didn't cause my child's addiction. I can't control it, and I can't cure it. But I also know that I contributed to it. And in many ways, it seems so insane that we are in any way capable of bringing another human being to a flourishing adulthood. And yet, you entrust these babies with us, and then they become adults, and they can break our hearts in so many ways. And I've been a heartbreaker, and I've been the brokenhearted. I ask for any woman out there that you would have mercy on her today and give her peace and give her a sense of where to go to get help. In the matchless name of Jesus.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you so much. Kind of got heavy there at the end, but that's just, I was feeling that's where we needed to go. So.
Fine with me. That's the only source I know.
I really recommend you check out Ashley's book, Little Black Sheep. It's just fantastic. You can get more information about Ashley Cleveland at ashleycleveland.com. Find out about her concerts, her music, and her book. And, of course, the book is available on Amazon.com and other places where you find such things. Ashley, thank you so much for being a part of the show. And
thank you for having me.
Thank you for sharing your story with us. It's just been amazing.
Well, it's my pleasure, Rick. Thank you.
The music you are listening to is from my scripture memory record, and I want to give it to you for free. Just go to my website, rickaltizer.com, and click Contact. Altizer is spelled Altizer. Or how about liking my Facebook page, facebook.com/Rick Altizer Show. I want to thank Paul Winkler, the investor coach, for sponsoring this show, and I want to thank you for listening. So be sure to check us out again next week as we discuss how we communicate the gospel through media to our culture. Let's be clear so the world can hear. I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.